They call him Seatin, the man of legends.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, what is up? It is Seatin here. Welcome to the 61 Arbiter Guide, also known as the Mage Tanking Guide. So in this video we're going to be talking all about 61 Arbiter, the best specs to use. We're going to be giving you macros, rotations, talking about the cooldowns, so all that fucking exciting stuff. Now the first thing we're going to go on to talk about is the spec. Now the best spec for 61 Arbiter as an overall is 61 Arbiter, 10 Warlock and 5 Stormcaller. This is for the increased charge generation rate and also the endurance that Warlock provides and also the damage reduction that Stormcaller provides. Now initially looking at sort of the Harbinger subsouls and what you can have, the Arbiter subsouls even, Harbinger may seem like a much better option, investing sort of 15 points into that for increased dodge and increased parry. It does seem like a lot, but what you have to take in mind is that's a very RNG way of tanking, and you're sacrificing quite a bit of health and quite a bit of damage reduction for that. Also, raid bosses have certain mechanics and abilities, pretty much like 90% of raid bosses' big attacks, they cannot be dodged or parried at all. So that spec might be a bit more effective for, say, large trash pools, where you just have mobs auto-attacking, but when you get to big raid bosses, that spec is going to be really ineffective in comparison to 10 Warlock and also 5 Stormcaller. So something to keep in mind. And with the Arbiter, there are absolutely tons of different subsoul variants. Like you can invest at 11 Pyromancer to get Flicker, you can go into the Dominator Soul to get a Spell Reflect, a Mana Drain, a Silence. There's loads and loads of shit you can play about with, and tons of different subsoul variants depending on what you need the spec for. You can go Archon for Purification, which is a cleanse. You can go Chloromancer for Natural Conversion, which basically causes the enemy's next damaging attack to heal you for 200% of the damage done, which provides like a really big cooldown on bosses like Crucia, which have a breath, because that heals you for basically all of the damage of double the damage of a breath, and when breaths hit really hard, then that ability can be a lifesaver. So it's really hard to tell you which one to use in which situation. You just need to be aware that like all these fucking subsoul crazy variants exist, but the kind of main one that you want to stick with and the most solid one overall is gonna be the 10 Warlock, 5 Stormcaller. But there is a ton of fun that you can have with the subsouls if you do wish to piss about with them, and in Expert and maybe Chronicles and, you know, all that kind of open world stuff, I encourage you to do that. It's quite fun, you know, getting some run speed increases and reflex and all that fun shit. So just figure out, if you're not using Arbiter for raiding, get something you like with those additional 15 points. But to actually make your tanking viable, you are going to need to have the 61 Arbiter spec. Now, one of the main mechanics you're going to have to understand when playing the Arbiter Soul is that whenever you go above 75 charge, you're going to get a shield that shields you for 4% of your maximum health, and also your armor is going to be increased by 30%. For that reason, once every 30 seconds, you need to ensure that you go above 75 charge at one point. Also, the shielding the shield effect will give you a debuff which lasts 20 seconds. There are various abilities that sort of eradicate this, and also various moves that reduce the cooldown, and they're sort of scattered throughout the tree. Another thing you need to be aware of is that whenever you go below 25% charge, you're going to get a buff that increases magic damage, reduces magic damage taken by 15%, and also a shield as well that shields for 4% of your maximum health. So for this reason, you essentially just need to be aware that you need to juggle your charge quite a bit and ensure that you keep both of those buffs up on you every 30 seconds. So if you notice one of them is down, the buffs are called Arcane Shielding and also Stormfront. There are various crawl alerts you can use to track them, which I will give a link to the guide written by Inatu Jones, known as Trunks, I believe. He's written a lovely guide on the forums which explains a bit more about charge juggling in quite a bit of detail. However, this guide is going to go over the very basics of Arbiter, teaching you a very easy and effective way to play it, and if you want further sort of charge juggling theory crafting, then Anato has written a beautiful guide on that, so be sure to check that out. One thing to quickly note is that you can instantly get both the damage reduction from spells and also the increased armor by simply using the ability known as Avalanche, which is the Arbiter's charge, so that puts both of the buffs on you, so that's very good for pulling, and also you can use that anytime in combat if, you know, one or both of them is about to drop off, just as a really quick and easy way to refresh both of them. Now moving on to talk about macros. In this spec, I've made it very lazy. The way that I like to play the game is I like to play it with as few buttons as possible because I am that kind of lazy person. So this is a very lazy and kind of, it'll get the job done, but it's not going to be super efficient in terms of DPS. You'll be able to hold aggro, but if you play it sort of following Inato's written guide, you're going to do a lot more damage and be a bit more effective on the charge management, which can possibly like increase your mitigation via the shield management and whatnot, but that stuff is only really needed for sort of the tier 3 content, the hardest stuff. For all kind of like the experts and the fairly casual players, this will do absolutely fine. So, sorry, I'll just go back to the macros. I have two macros, a single target one, which has a Glacial Spike, Counter Shock, Scatter Strike, and Galvanic Strike in, and an AOE one, which has Counter Shock, Shattered Reflection, Jolting Wave, and Icy Blast in. Now these two are really straightforward. I mean, for the AoE one, literally you can spam that one forever, do really super effective AoE damage to people near you, and never go at all. Now you'll probably have to sort of be fairly aware of the range on certain abilities, like for example Icy Blast, which is in the AoE macro. You can actually use that to pull from range, so if you're using the AoE macro while you're at range, it's not going to do much because Shadow Reflection and Jolting Wave are 360-degree cleaves, so if like you're using them and there's no one near you, they're not going to do anything. So you probably want to have Icy Blast on a separate button, maybe for pulling like large groups of mobs that are far away from you. So just as a bit of a pro tip there. Now for the single target one, you can spam that to oblivion, and that will pretty much guarantee you single target aggro on your target. There are a few efficient ways to sort of do the rotation, such as when you have full charge, you probably want to hit a separate ability, which is in the macro called Vortex, and then you can spam 5 Glacial Spikes in a row, because what Vortex does is it basically causes Glacial Spike to have no cooldown, and Glacial Spike is your hardest hitting ability. Now, two other things I've got sort of on separate keys as well are Ice Fury and Galvanic Strike. Now, I don't really bother min-maxing with these two buttons. They're essentially, Galvanic Strike is there if I need to build charge, and Ice Fury is there if I need to quickly dump charge. So that is what I essentially use those two buttons for on their own. So that is pretty much it for the AoE and single target rotation. I don't think I've got Cloud Burst in my single target macro actually. You could probably add that at the bottom, but I've got that on a separate key. Cloud Burst can be used for essentially getting aggro ranged, because you can essentially run around spamming that. But once again, remember guys, that can only be used on a single target, but it's yeah, it's quite good if you want to run around and spam that at range. If you want to do that, you can do that. Now what I want to go on to talk about next is aggro generation, so I'm just going to cover all the various taunts and misdirect abilities. Now Arbiter has a total of I believe it's 4 different taunts. That's right, you have Icy Command, which is an AoE taunt that pulls up to 5 enemies to the mage. So this is basically like an AoE taunt with a pull, so it'll pull all nearby targets to you, which is a very good taunt for like stacking up caster mobs. You have Biting Wind, which is your standard single target taunt, and that will just taunt the target you're attacking and won't pull it or anything. You have Frozen Violation, which will force up to 10 nearby enemies to attack you, so that is your standard AoE taunt, and that's on a 20-second cooldown. And then you have Choking Flood, which is a single target grip taunt, so that will taunt the target and also pull the target towards you. So that is pretty damn useful. Along with those 4 different taunts you have, which is a shitload, you also have Misdirection and also Arcane Projection. Now, Misdirection buffs the raid member and all members of their group and transfers 100% of the threat generated by them and 10% of the damage taken by those allies to the mage for 10 seconds. So literally, if you misdirect all the group with the strongest DPS in the raid, or if you're in a dungeon, you just have to click that button. That will transfer all the threat from the entire party to you, and you're pretty much done on aggro for the fight. Like, that is such an overpowered ability for aggro. It's pretty damn ridiculous. And then you have Arcane Protection, which is basically a shorter cooldown single target misdirect. So maybe if there is somebody absolutely welling out the DPS and their aggro needs to be reduced and you want to steal some of their aggro, you can do that. So you probably want to have that on a fairly easy to bind key. Just one that you can easily hit if somebody is doing super DPS and you want to steal some of their aggro. On to buffs. Essentially, Arbiter is pretty straightforward with buffs. When you're tanking, you want to use Arcane Ward, Energized Vitality, Ebb and Flow, Aqueous Blessing, and then from the Warlock tree you want to pop Dark Armor. If for whatever reason you don't need to have aggro, want to do a bit more DPS, then you can put on Frosted Ward, and that will reduce your threat by 50% and increase damage and healing done. So that kind of, it's just used for phases maybe where you don't need to tank for like a minute or two, but you want to do a bit of extra DPS because you believe it will help the raid. So yeah, that's pretty damn straightforward. And finally, what we're going to talk about in the guide is the kind of cooldowns you have with Arbiter, and possibly effective ways to use them and how to use them. So you have some really cool absorption cooldowns. Now you have one called Crystalline Shield, which buffs the group or raid member. If the ally receives a killing blow within 30 seconds, the buff is consumed and applies a shield, which absorbs 50% of the target's maximum health. So essentially, this is kind of like a cheat death that you can put on somebody. If they're about to die, then they're going to get a shield which shields them for 50% of their maximum health. So maybe if you see somebody standing in AOE, or you're about to die, or anybody that in your raid or party, this can be applied to anyone as long as they're in your raid and party. If they're about to die, you can quickly put it on them, and that will save them from death. So that is pretty cool. And then you have Mana Aegis, which basically absorbs damage received, but then converts the damage absorbed into mana, and that kind of eats away at your mana pool a bit. But then you can use sort of Crystallize, which blocks your charge gain to sort of regain that mana if for whatever reason, you know, you're having mana issues and you don't have too much mana. The final absorption ability you have is called Shield of the North Wind. This is really fucking powerful, and it absorbs damage equal to 100% of the mage's maximum health, and it lasts 10 seconds. So on my lovely PDS character here, that would be an 85k absorption shield, which is a shit ton. Literally, it is very powerful. It does come with a 2-minute cooldown though, so you know, that's just something to bear in mind. Now the other cooldowns you have are Shared Agony, so this one shields the ally, intercepting 50% of the damage they receive and replacing the ally's toughness with the mage's for 6 seconds. So basically this is kind of like a damage reduction cooldown that you can throw on somebody. Maybe if like somebody ninja pulls, then that will give you a, it's off the global cooldown as well, so it will give you a few seconds to pick off the targets attacking them and make sure they don't get crit on one shot. So that's pretty damn cool. And the final cooldown you have is Shield Surge, which reduces damage taken by 20% for 4 seconds and removes overheated and recharging from the mage. And basically overheating and recharging are the buffs that I mentioned earlier, that you get from basically going above and below 75 charge, and they're kind of like the cooldown on the shield that you get from going above and below 75 and 25 charge. So that's just something to keep in mind. That's a very quick way of getting rid of those shields, and also the 20% damage reduction is pretty damn nice. That one has a fairly low cooldown of 30 seconds, so don't be too afraid to use that one. So that is pretty much it for the Arbiter, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, one more thing, there is Soothing Waters, that isn't terribly good. It consumes all charge when cast, restoring health to the mage based on the amount of charge consumed. So it restores, it's an insta-heal for about 4 to 5k, which in a raid environment is moderately useless. Maybe in a dungeon environment it might be good, but it kind of does suck a small bag of dicks. It's not that good. But it's a good way to like quickly totally eradicate all your charge. So if I use Soothing Waters now, right, what it'll do is it'll bring me below 25 charge, instantly proccing me with Frosted Shield, which is the shield I get below 25 charge. So that is kind of like one efficient use for it, just to keep in mind, you know, if you urgently need a shield and you don't have the overheated debuff, you can use that, and that's pretty damn cool. So ladies and gentlemen, that is it for the 61 Arbiter guide. I hope you've learnt a fair bit about the spec. I think this video has been moderately educational. I'm going to do a couple of videos coming within the next week and a bit, with me tanking some expert dungeons on my Mage live, and also doing a commentary of what I'm using and why. So if you want to see that kind of stuff and maybe get a more practical hands-on view at Arbiter tanking, then feel free to watch that. Also, I did an Arbiter preview video about a month ago, and that also gives you a very good example of how Arbiter works in action. So I'll give a link to that in the description below if you want to see sort of Arbiter in action and how I play the spec in actual like dungeons and raids. That should be pretty educational for anyone wanting to watch. So thank you ladies and gentlemen for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. If you have any questions at all, feel free to type them in the comments, and then I will do my best to answer them. My name has been Seatin, and you should have a wonderful day.